record to the cloud.
Now you pause it. Welcome everybody to the month of May 2022 Bite-Size Science webinar. This year in 2022, we've really been focusing on a lot of our citizen science projects that we support through Florida Sea Grant. And today will be no exception. We are fortunate to have Mr. Victor Blanco, who is the Florida Sea Grant Extension Agent in Taylor County, talk to us about artificial reef monitoring. Victor, please take it away.
Thank you, Laura, and welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us today on this another episode of Bite-Size Science webinar series. As Laura mentioned, today I'm going to try to focus on artificial reef monitoring and a citizen science-based program that we run here in Taylor County. For the last 4 years, we have been working with local partners like the Taylor County Reef Research Team, and thanks to funding from the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission Artificial Reef Program and the Chamber of Commerce, we've been able to put together this program that I'm gonna just go through the presentation. So let's start with why do we do artificial reef monitoring? And there are different reasons why we do this. And each monitoring program will try to tackle one or two or different of these reasons why they do the monitoring. There's different aspects that you go out there and check. One of them is the location of the artificial reef, sometimes after the deployment, or especially, for example, after a big hurricane or storm, we want to make sure that the conditions and the location of the reefs are in the same place so we can update coordinates. Also, through the monitoring, we evaluate the current height of material above the bottom of what is called the reef. We check the minimum vertical clearance to the sea surface. So these two components are directly related. And also we want to know every time we go there to check the artificial reef, how the general structure and the condition is on that material. If it's intact, if it has deteriorated with time or collapsed, or it's just completely gone. Also, we want to make sure to evaluate the settling conditions. For example, if there is a vessel that is sunken on the seafloor, we want to make sure that it stayed in an upright position or in the original settling condition. We want to make sure the general fouling conditions or various materials, how this life is growing on top of the artificial reef material, the presence or absence of different species or different structures, and the assessment of invasive species like lionfish, and more recently, a new damselfish species that is being recognized, especially in the Panhandle area. Another reason to do monitoring is evaluation for public health in areas like the Orange County Reef. For example, they evaluate the presence of polychlorinated biphenyl, or PCB. And also just to take underwater video and still images to document the status of the reef condition. So as we see, there's a big list, a large list. And if it's a research base, maybe they're going there to do a specific evaluation of a specific species or condition or habitat. So there are many, many reasons why we do this monitoring program. One way that we do the monitoring is through counting fish. But why do we count fish? First, to compare fish populations between habitats. So if we in an area, we have different types of artificial reef materials, like, for example, pyramids or secondary use concrete or scrap metal. We want to know if the fish population between these habitats is equal or if there is a difference and what is their composition. And also quantitatively monitoring fish composition and abundance over time. So if we have a permanent monitoring program over time, year by year, we can assess changes in the fish population composition and abundance. These estimates will help us do or have different uses, like from the ecological aspects, we can assess the community dynamics. From also that information help to field stock assessment programs that can help us improve regulations on specific species. Also, to evaluate the efficacy of management, is there a necessity to change a regulation? Is a need to protect or to create a protect area? So this information is really useful in the fish counts. And finally, as a business for a business application, because as we know, the type and abundance of fish that are in the artificial reef, we can reach out to the fishing community or the diving community and develop destinations for anglers and divers. So during many years, FWC has been leading these artificial reef monitoring efforts. But the graph to the left, which is a report from Bill Horn in 2015, we can see that through the time that effort has decreased, and and that's because of different reasons, right? Shortage of a staff. Sometimes they're very busy doing a lot of type of administrative work, and the number of artificial reef just increased year after year. So based on the limitations that official surveys have, different organizations have stepped in and try to promote and adopt monitoring programs to fill out that gap of data that helps regulate and understand the real impact of artificial reefs programs in different regions of the state. So for example, here we see a publication from Seaman in the left, top left, we see a map with the coastal counties in different colors. And basically what they were saying is what type of monitoring program they were implementing in all these counties. This has changed through time. Some artificial reef programs have gone through some time, and sometimes due to a lack of leadership, they just cut out for a while and then they start over. But it is very important to continue these different type of monitoring programs. There is a list of some of these organizations across the state that somehow are running some artificial reef programs, and my peers are going to share some of these links on the chat box, so you can copy and check them after the presentation if you're interested. But especially, we have the Reef Environmental Education Foundation, which they have not only they started here in the US, but now it is a global database for reef and fish monitoring. So there is a side whenever you are diving and you would just adopt their methodology, you can upload that information there, and that really helps the fishing and diving community to understand the impact of artificial reefs. Here in Taylor County, talking more about our experience, our artificial reef program is starting in 1995, especially with Boca Reef, which is the permit holder is the county. But there are other artificial reef like the Sting Hatchet Reef and the Sting Hatchet Fisheries Management Area, which the permit holder is the University of Florida. And those artificial reefs were designed especially for a long-term study on gag grouper recruitment into fishing grounds. But anyway, these areas have been popular recreational fishing spots, and it's important for us to identify and understand the fish structure so we can provide this information back to our stakeholders. And this program, not only the monitoring, but the enhancement has been funded also by FUC and the Perry Taylor Chamber of Commerce through some funding that they provided. So how we have involved citizens in this. In 2018, we put together a proposal that was funded by FWC. And the first thing we did was to create a social media campaign to enroll volunteer divers who wanted to support our monitoring efforts on this citizen science-based program. At that point, at least 86 divers were signed up for the training. And as you see in the image to the left, that post on Facebook really have reached a lot of people, more than almost 32,000 people were reached, and a lot of engagement. So it really moved a lot of the diving community in our region. At the end, we host a training session, and we trained 30 volunteer divers in 2018. And then in 2020, we trained 10 more divers. But also, I was invited by a group of divers in Pensacola who wanted to implement the same methodology that we were doing here in Taylor County. And that occasion, and that was early 2020 as well, I trained about 15 more divers in the Pensacola area. The training was in person and basically was focused on fish identification of those fish species in artificial reef in the Gulf of Mexico, and also the fish census methods and artificial reef structure assessment methodology. And all the aspects were involved in the logistics for that. So how do we count fish? We use two main methodologies. One is called the Bonsack-Benerot or stationary point method count, and the other one is the reef robin diver count. So in the first one, which is a stationary method, the diver just sits on the bottom. Sometimes we'll just hover a little bit on the water column, and we'll set a perimeter of about or a circle around here of about 7.5 meters. And then we'll count for 5 minutes, identify and count all the fish species that they will see. So it really takes some practice to make sure, because to identify and properly count the fish, as the fish will go in and out of that area that you are counting. And you have to make a 360 turn to make sure that you try to catch as many fish as you can, and you will stand as close or close enough to the artificial reef structure. Then after you finish that 5 minutes count, you move on into just regular, free dive. During this robin dive, what you do is you record all the served fish based on an assigned abundance category, which is if you see one, is a single. If you see few, is about 2 to 10 fish. Many, between 11 and 100. And if it's more than 100, which is like a big school. Of course, it's going to be very difficult to count like 100 and 102 fish, but you have that relative abundance scale to name the fish. Here in Taylor County, originally, in 2018, we started with 18 sites, which we survey. And in 2019 to 2021, we continue with and selected only 6 sites. Volunteer divers has invested 868 total hours, 76 of which are only diving hours. And that's an equivalent of almost $20,000 in contribution of this group of divers. They have been able to identify at least 29 species of 17 families using the stationary method, and at least 35 species of 23 families using the roving diving method. And the difference is because during the roving diving, you can search more closely to the material, and some creek-tip fish, those fish of the very small, like gobbets or other creatures that live under, or fish that live under the material, you will be able to see them and identify them. To do this, we collect different information. In the center, we see the fish sensing form that we use, and the first column is the stationary for adults, and and then we have the stationary count for juveniles as well. One aspect that we have been lacking is the sizing the fish. We're starting trying to implement some sizing, but we determined that the error was too high. So we're trying to implement the use of lasers and using video recording to estimate the size of some specific fish. And then to the right, we have our dive logs. And then at the end, we will take all the information regarding the artificial reef material condition and some measurements just to make sure to keep the records straight. Also, we keep information on water conditions, the bottom conditions, the reef material data, and of course, the dive data. Here are some of our volunteer divers who have joined us in past missions going out. And one of the outcomes of this monitoring program has been the creation of this YouTube channel, which is the Boca Reef Taylor County YouTube channel. We have short 30 seconds to 1 minute videos of all the reef sites. So anglers or scuba divers can go there and check the different fish species. But also we have used these videos as a quality control and quality assurance way to review when we are not sure if any count has been, there is a doubt in the identification of different fish species. This graph just showed the accumulative fish counts per reef site, and this was in 2018. Of course, we see that the scrap metal to the right have a larger counts, but also that it might be due because these scrap metal have a larger footprint on the bottom. So it will cover larger areas, it will aggregate more fish than, for example, the limber cubes or even the concrete culverts. But this is the type of analysis of the information that we do based on the information collected by this citizen science program. Also, we have created this type of fact sheets that we share with angler community in fishing tournaments. So what to the right, what it shows is the probability to find these spore fish in different reef type materials. So if, for example, you're trying to catch an amberjack, what this graph says is that it's most likely you will find it in the tetrahedrons and in the scrap metal than any other materials. And then we have the list of the and coordinates of the locations of all the reef materials there. Finally, what are the next in artificial reef monitoring? So It is very important to follow with FWC Artificial Reef Program, and we will share the link in the chat box. But if you are interested in participating in this, get training in artificial reef fish identification, especially depending on where you live, okay? Because there are going to be slightly changes in the dominance of fish species depending on where you are, okay? Get involved locally and participate. If, for example, in your location, there's not a leader in artificial reef monitoring, maybe you can take the lead, and there are always ways to try to get funding through FWC or through other ways. Use your recreational fishing dive to collect data and share that with reef.org, for example, if your county or where you live, there's not an established monitoring program. And then more recently, underwater drones have become more affordable. So actually, we've been trying to use drones to collect data during the winter time. So when it's very where we can't go in the water because the water temperature is too cold for scuba diving, it increased the risk, right? For recreational divers, I mean. And also, of course, if you are want to get involved in the citizen science program, contact your local artificial reef program manager or FWC. That will point you in the right direction. And very soon, late this month or early next month, we will be hosting a new training in artificial reef fish identification. So also follow us on Facebook or in the Sea Grant social media, where we are going to be sharing the information on these dates. I appreciate, and if you have any question, I'll be glad to take those questions. But first, there is a small poll that we will appreciate if you can take just a couple of seconds to answer. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Victor. Interesting as always. And as Victor said, if you can just take a quick moment to complete our poll, it helps us to assess ourselves, how we're doing as far as giving you the information that you're looking for. So we really do appreciate the feedback. Victor, I think while they're taking the poll, though, there is a question in the chat from Carrot. Says, are there any opportunities for snorkelers to assist with monitoring?
Well, that's a great question. Actually, more recently, inshore artificial reef has been deployed across the state. So for snorkelers, I think there is an opportunity there to implement this type of programs. As I said, if for example, in the locations that you visit or in the location that you live and you're a regular visitor to a specific reef site, and if there is not a established program, you can always go to reef.org and just make your reports. And if you want to get training on fish identification for the reef fish in the area that you visit, you can take videos and share that with us. I'd be glad to help you identify the fish, or with the FWC Artificial Reef Program staff. I know they will be glad to help you out to identify the fish species, so you do the proper counts and identification.
Sounds like a great opportunity. Philip has another very interesting question, in my opinion. He says his GoPro camera records sounds underwater and that he's noticed different reefs sound different. Are you studying sounds of the reefs with different fish?
Well, that's really interesting. And last year, we wanted to include that aspect in our monitoring program. To try to record sounds and analyze that. The thing is that it takes some specialized software to really analyze the sounds and differences between fish, but certainly that's an option. To take the audio from GoPro cameras, I'm not 100% sure if that's one of the options, but I think some researchers are looking into this new area because that way, the when a diver goes into artificial reef, some fish species will just leave the area. So using these indirect methods to count fish, we make sure we identify those species that might just swim away as the diver is visiting the area. So that's a really interesting new exploring area that's been putting in place for artificial reef monitoring.
That is exciting. Now I have a question, Victor. I remember in the early part of your presentation, you said you had maybe 80 people were interested and you ended up training 30. How much of a roadblock from a citizen science perspective is it for training people to learn how to identify these fish? There's so many different kinds of fish. It can probably be a little bit overwhelming.
Yeah, that's correct. So about the number of people, well, we had, in that time, we had people from Georgia, Tennessee, South Carolina, and all over the state here in Florida who signed in to participate. Maybe they just saw the post and didn't realize the location where the training was going to take place. But then of the 30 that we actually trained, they came from part of the Panhandle, Tallahassee, Gainesville area, and Homosassa. So we cover quite a big range of geographic scope of here in the Big Bend region in Florida. But the training that we do on fish identification, what we do is we try to focus on the 20 top fish species that are more likely for people to see. And as you go diving, you get more familiar with that. If you are aware of the different species, you start getting the differences between all these fish that once look like one single species, then you say, okay, this is something else and this is different. And you start, identifying those differences. But if you are visiting different areas, there are charts that you can use, or you can, there's a lot of online available information, or you can reach out to us in Sea Grant, and we can help you try to make a short list of the most common species in artificial reef in different areas in the state of Florida.
Well, very interesting. Thank you. Well, we're getting close to the end of our time. We want to thank Victor for his presentation today and remind all of our fans that the June Citizen Science Bite-Sized Science Program is coming up on June 2nd. And we're going to have Dr. Angela Collins talking about Goliath grouper and the citizen science efforts towards doing a better job of documenting that particular fish population. I think it ties in well with some of the work that Victor's doing. But Victor, thank you again for being with us today. We appreciate it, and we appreciate all of you who take your time to attend our Bite-Sized Science webinars. If you ever have any questions, feel free to let us know. Thanks, and have a great day, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.